Coming to you from the city where the Christmas season started in September, it's Ventriloquism Weekly. Hey guys, Matt Bailey here, and I want to address why I mentioned Christmas in the opening, because it's November 2nd, and for me, Christmas music holiday season starts the day after Halloween. That's just how we are with it, how I am with it. I'm a sucker for the holidays. In fact, I gotta tell you, I was in a little anecdote before we get started. I figured you guys would enjoy this. I was in Macy's like 3 weeks ago, October like 10th or something, and There was a worker hanging Christmas ornaments above one of the clothing racks. This big Macy's on 34th Street. I said, "Christmas decorating already?" He said, "Already? We're behind. Happy holidays." And I guess the reason I'm in a holiday mood is because we have kind of an early holiday treat today, because today is guest number 50. 50 people have come on this program. And when I realized we'd be approaching this number, I knew we had to do something special. And as I like to think I do often on this program, through going to something special, I just listen to you guys. Rock and roll ventriloquist Carla Rhodes is without a doubt the most requested guest by listeners. I'm serious. I put it to you guys. I say, who do you want to see? And more often than the guy with the dead terrorist, you know? Actually, yeah. So she is the most requested guest for this show. And known for her vaudeville-era character, Cecil Sinclair, Rhodes has performed in alternative venues all across New York City and the nation. And when I got to sit down with her and tell her that she was the most requested guest, you'll love her reaction. We go through this whole thing in the little interview, which I got to do in person, which I'll talk about in a second, because timing couldn't be more perfect on Carla's side as well, because she just launched her new web show, The Plight of Cecil. And I urge you all to check it out. It's actually very, very, very well done. So here now, in person, from the Bean in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. That's right. I went all the way out to Brooklyn to do this, because I wanted to do this in person since she was based in New York. She's here to tell us how New York has influenced her art and the psychology behind Saltwater Taffy. You'll understand in a second. Our interview with Carla Rhodes. Carla Rhodes, welcome to Ventriloquism Weekly. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for inviting me out to Brooklyn, Williamsburg, to interview you at the Bean. This is wonderful. And I have to tell you before we get started, you are the 50th guest of the program.
Wow.
Which is really cool. I'm so glad we got to do it, because to put you in number 50 is really cool, because you're the most requested guest out of anybody on the program.
That's really cool.
I put it forward to the vans. They say, who do you want to hear about? They say, Carla. Get Carla on the show.
That's really cool.
And I say, okay, we'll have to do something special for when we get Carla. And
awesome.
Number 50th guest.
50.
And
I'm surprised there's 50 ventriloquists.
I'm not touching that.
Yeah.
So I want to start at the beginning, as I do with all of my guests. How did you get started in ventriloquism?
I saw Sherry Lewis on TV when I was 8 or 9. I always get the age messed up, and I just was drawn to it and wanted to do it, and kept at it ever since. I had phases where I was doing it or not doing it, but it's always been present in my life since then. I just fell in love with Sherry Lewis and how she added in ventriloquism and comedy and music and all this creative stuff through that art form. Was really cool.
Yeah, Sherry Lewis is one of the geniuses. And skipping ahead just a little bit, we'll come back to your beginnings, but since you mentioned Sherry, Plight of Cecil.
Yeah.
Mallory is a producer, I saw in the credits. What's that like, getting to work with her daughter?
Well, I love Mallory. I've known her for a long time. I'm kind of like we call each other sisters now. So just like getting advice and stuff. And she produced and wrote a lot of Lamb Chops play-alongs. So she knows a lot and had a lot of great tips. She executive produced remotely from LA.
That's really
so
cool.
It's great to have her be part of it, because I think it's kind of a modern take on a lot of what Sherry was doing.
It certainly is.
Or more adult.
Yeah, definitely. I encourage everyone to go check that out. We'll talk more about that towards the end because that's what you're doing most recent. But I want to go back to those first shows.
Uh-oh.
What were you doing? How were you developing this unique style that everybody in the community and events and everybody that knows you and follows you, you have thousands of followers on Facebook. How did that style for you come to be?
I think it's like anything, just like kind of staying true to yourself and seeing what works and what doesn't. Like with me, I think early on, like I always knew I was going to do something different with it, and then I would get roped into other people giving advice and then kind of have a tug of war with myself. And I finally, I think, really developed my own style when I just let go and listened to my gut and just didn't care. So a lot of it was built through my many different loves. Like I love old comedy, I love music, I love rock and roll, and just kind of using ventriloquism as an envelope to put all that stuff in. And so like, I mean, I'm in my early 30s now, so it took a long time. I mean, Cecil, I probably picked him up about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8, and then left him alone for 2 years. So for me, it's like, it's kind of a slow process, and then when it comes out, it comes pouring out.
Yeah.
But Cecil took a lot of just doing spots in New York and messing around and failing with him until I really discovered his character and let his character speak for himself.
And how did you find New York audiences receptive to ventriloquism? Because I've been performing in the city as well, and I've just been overwhelmed by how people aren't shunning it.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, New York's one of the best, most artistic cities in the world. I mean, I'm sure that's why you live here. And people are, you can kind of, I feel like people like me and you move here to find other people like us. So, I mean, when I moved here, I fell into the alternative comedy scene where people were doing a lot of different things, and I was luckily embraced by that community in a lot of ways. But also, I fell in with the resurgence of burlesque and vaudeville. So people really liked it, which is great to get a good reception from New Yorkers. I feel like if you can get people to laugh here, from my experience, everywhere else it's not easy, but it's not nearly as much as a challenge as New York audiences.
Oh yeah, and I was scared it was going to be a challenge. And so those venues that were those alternative venues, can you talk about some of those just to give our listeners kind of a map of where this kind of comedy goes?
Well, alternative venues are like basically it's the breakout from the standard comedy club. So people do something in like a bar, like a rock and roll venue. I'm trying to think of examples because they change all the time. There's a lot in Williamsburg or Greenpoint, or when I first moved here, the East Village, there was like Rafifi, there was a place called Mo Pitkins, where everybody was kind of going, people you see on TV now. And then I've always done rock venues too, like the Cutting Room is a favorite. But then more like cabaret stuff like Joe's Pub.
Yeah.
There was Galapagos. So like I'm kind of blanking on a lot of the alternative places now, but there's just a lot. It's kind of like whoever wants to produce a show produces it, and it's never in the comedy club format.
Right.
It's basically like a loose show with more variety and a non-traditional venue.
And I think that's something that everyone can learn. Just turn over those rocks and see what you see.
Yeah, I think people have to explore here and take a lot of risk. I think that's how you develop.
Absolutely, it's wonderful. And speaking of development, how did you develop the character of Cecil?
Cecil, I was at the convention like 8 years ago, and I'd always wanted an English-style ventriloquism dummy. And Tom Ladshaw, who, you know, has like one of the most amazing tables of antique and vintage stuff, and I saw Red Ear underneath the table. Yeah. I'm like, what's that? And he's like, it's this horrible-looking dummy that like no one, like, I had to take it off the table because it's so ugly. It was scaring people. And of course I was like, oh my God, I want to see it. And he pulled it out, and it was Cecil, and I just like connected with it and wanted it because it was English style. When I picked it up, he broke. His string broke, and I'm like, Tom, I broke the dummy. And he was kind of like, it doesn't matter, it's falling apart anyway. And I remember that was my first couple of years in New York, and I didn't have the money, but I just like got my credit card out, and I'm like, I don't know why I need this. And I just was like, it seemed like powerful to, I've never had a puppet like that where I've just been like, whoa. And I just let it sit for like a year, and then a friend dared me to do, I was always doing comedy and ventriloquism in New York, but he dared me to do an open mic with Cecil. And I just went up with Cecil and had like no material.
Just riffed.
Yeah, and that was like, I remember that was very scary, but he got a few laughs, so it was encouraging, and so it was kind of built slowly that way, because like, I feel like his character came out so strong. But he's my favorite. He's the only puppet I've ever had that relationship with, where it feels like he's a character, like a cartoon character.
Oh, yeah.
Or whatever.
And you can sense that relationship is so strong. It's such a unique and different character, and it really fits into that rock and roll aspect of what you were talking about.
Oh, thank you.
It really does. And so what prompted you to look at Vent and go, I'm going to turn this on its head, and I'm going to do it differently?
Well, I think it was just like, when I was a teenager, I was really into rock and roll and playing music, and I had a Mick Jagger and Keith Richards puppet and a David Bowie puppet, because I thought maybe I could manipulate pop culture through the puppet. I was just trying to get away to, I don't know if it was so intentional, except like being a fangirl in certain ways and loving the Stones and being like, this is an excellent way for them to notice me. But I think maybe it was my generation and my age. And before that, I had a puppet that was a teenager that I donated to the museum this summer when I saw you. So I think it was just maybe just starting it young and developing as I developed, and always being like an artist. I mean, I don't want to call myself an artist, but always being interested in artistic people and artistic things. And I'm just a weirdo, and my influences are like, you know, Marx Brothers and Buster Keaton and really weird vaudeville stuff.
And that comes through, because it's not, what you do with Cecil is not like a parody of vaudeville.
Yeah.
It's like a throwback to vaudeville, and people can laugh at that time, but also have a window to it as well.
Yeah.
So when you're writing for Cecil, what do you think about? How do you write for such a unique character?
Well, it's interesting because it's like, I really never had a character like this, and it is like the typical crazy ventriloquism thing, this stuff. I go through periods where I'm like a little bit blocked, like I am now. I think just because I just wrote that whole series and did that. But then it's like when I sit down and really focus to write for him, it really just flows out. But the thing that's interesting is when I'm on stage, he's funniest when he ad-libs, when I ad-lib.
Yeah.
And the stuff that comes out, I'm like, oh my God, where does that come from? And I've started to figure out, I think it's my subconscious knowledge of being a total geeky girl and having all this vaudeville trivia in my head and everything I've seen, and somehow it just connects and goes through. Like, he makes so many weird references, but it's just from like, he's obsessed with Eleanor Roosevelt. I actually think she was amazing. And so it comes through, anything kind of in that period comes from my own fascination. But for him, it's like, if you create a really strong character, it's a lot easier to write for if you really know who that person is. Like, I know he's really grumpy and he's kind of misogynist and he's kind of racist, but he's also kind of endearing, and he's also like a vaudeville performer. It's more like, it's like when people do sketch and they have a character, they're not typically doing jokes. It's more like what the character does. So writing for him is kind of like, I think, because I've gotten to the point where I really understand him.
Yeah.
And he's going to say weird things like, my shoes are made of licorice and poison. And like weird things that only he would say.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh, it does. It does. Like the Saltwater Taffy thing that you do with him. That wouldn't make sense for any other character. It wouldn't get the laughs that it does when it gets it, because it's character-driven comedy.
Yeah, and I don't even know where, I think it was I used to have a ragtime piano player with me, and we were hanging out one day, and I just started saying Saltwater Taffy over, and just started, a lot of it is because I'm really like a kid, like I never grew up, and I love songs that are like, it's almost Andy Kaufman, where you push and push. It's funny, and then it's not funny because you're pushing, but then the audience laughs because you push so much that it becomes absurd.
Yeah.
So like a whole song about Saltwater Taffy, good Saltwater Taffy is good, a lot of it is not good, and it's just like a weird candy that I don't know, I'm not positive why he's so obsessed with that. It's pretty weird, but I like this song.
Yeah, but it works.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where
it's just a weird candy that's like accessible. It's like archaic, but people still know what it is.
Yeah, because like Wonka did the Laffy Taffy things, and people know.
I love Laffy Taffy. That stuff is so good.
Yeah.
It's probably, I grew up in a candy store. My dad owned a candy store, so maybe you're making me explore the reasons. You're like ventriloquial therapist.
Well, that's a first. I've never been called a
ventriloquial therapist. Because you're making me explore the reasons behind.
Well, no,
very good.
It's just cool. I'm just saying, what you had touched on about character-driven comedy is true. That those jokes wouldn't work for a redneck character or a old woman character. They work for Cecil because of everything that he is. Now, the other thing what I like to ask when I see unique characters, and I like to ask about the puppet. I don't do that often, but have you looked into having like a backup Cecil made because of all of those situations?
You're very smart. I like that you're asking these. I've never had someone ask me such specific question. It's cool. I got held up at gunpoint after a gig a couple of years ago, the night before Halloween, and it was someone in a car and they jumped out. I guess they had followed me and a girlfriend, and we were walking. We weren't paying attention after a gig, just like laughing. And they tried to take my suitcase, which had Cecil in it. So I started screaming, and it's ridiculous because I'm like fighting for a puppet. But just everyone listening, if you scream really loud, constant, it like scares them. The guy got scared, which is great because who knows what would have happened. But after that, I was like, oh my God, like there's only one of these, and if anything happens, I'll be like screwed. So Alan Seamock did a cast of the face and made a copy. I don't use, like the copy is great. There's something about the old one that's kind of magic though, and the new one, I like it, but it's like when you find, I've got guitars, like I've got an old one I really love and a new one that's great too, but I feel like that one's more on backup for disaster, but the old one's really falling apart.
Yeah.
But that's why I got a copy, because I was like...
Gotta protect it and make sure...
In case anyone holds me up at gunpoint again and tries to take my ventriloquist dummy, and they have no idea what it is.
I gotta tell you, when I think of that question, that was not the answer.
I know, but it's a good story.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Scary story.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of characters and puppets, is it just Cecil now, or do you still use Keith Richards? Because I gotta confess, before, when I woke up this morning, I continued YouTubing all your videos, and I found a video that's a couple years old with you, with Keith Richards doing something, not using a stand and just doing very interesting, very cool stuff with the puppet.
Yeah.
Do you still use other characters in your show, or is it just Cecil?
I mean, it's funny because I love the Mick and Keith thing, and that's why in college they called me the rock and roll ventriloquist. I went to college near Nashville, and I would open for a ton of bands. So one guy, this really cute guy in a band, he's like, "You're the rock and roll ventriloquist." And I'm like, "Thank you." And I'm like, that's cool. And then the Mick and Keith thing I really love, but I was really getting known as like in the city the girl with the Keith Richards puppet, which was cool and then in a way I think I thought artistically I'm like, it's like kind of limiting because those characters, I mean, Keith is just like a drugged out guy and Mick's like loves money or whatever, and I love the Stones and I love those puppets, but as Cecil developed I kind of pushed them aside. But then like probably 2 years ago, I don't know if it's been two years, which seems so long, but I had a band and we were doing a monthly show called The Continuing Story of Carla Rhodes, and Mick and Keith were like kind of like my spirit guides, and I had a pigeon puppet and an alligator puppet, and I really want to bring those back through the web series because Continuing Story was basically the tale of like the typical tale coming to New York and all the obstacles. Like Herschel Ragbottoms was the pigeon, and I met him in like the park in East Village, and he was a failed artist and would say stuff like, "Oh, don't do art, it'll break your heart," and then Mick and Keith would show up. So they're there. I think they're just kind of waiting to come back.
That's cool. And
they're in the wings.
And you mentioned that web series. Let's dig into that.
Yeah.
How'd that come about, and when did that get started? And I know that when we started talking, you were in the thick of post-production.
That was crazy.
And it was just nuts. So tell our listeners all about The Plight of Cecil.
Well, The Plight of Cecil stars Cecil Sinclair and myself and my pet Dove, who's a real dove, as a secretary. Mm-hmm. And I had wanted to do short films with him forever because I think it's perfect with the music and the comedy and the look of him and the feel. It was just doing it. Like, that took a crew of like 15 people, saving up some money. I mean, you're in film school, you know how like something simple looks so easy. But the whole thing is he's a vaudeville agent, and it's like what happens. And hopefully, as the series rolls on, everyone has a special. Every episode has a special guest, so you can watch them independently or all in a row, and a storyline will develop. So the first one, the director and I finally got together and we're like, we got to do it, and set a deadline for like a month later, which was crazy because we built the set in my living room.
Really? That whole beautiful thing was in your living room?
Yeah, thank you. I just moved because I've got a lot of really old stuff and I had these shelves, and so like, it's like with all the things I'm really interested in behind the scenes, so I knew, of course, with like budget, you know how much film is, I'm like, I gotta use what I have. And then I started eBaying stuff, like his old phones and a gramophone, like what I could. But we built it in the living room the day before, me helping with everything, shot it the next day, broke it down that night, and then started. Thank goodness I had a friend editing it, but I ended up having to learn After Effects and Final Cut, and so like I learned, it was like a crash course in film school. I even had to color it myself.
Yeah.
Which was like, I would like to have it recolored, but I think it really turned out great for what it is, and now it's just getting funding to move it forward.
Are you going to do a Kickstarter with it? What are you going to...
I am thinking about it. Right now I'm applying for grants and trying to figure it out before I do the Kickstarter route, but if not, I'll do the Kickstarter. I want to get it out there more and get people more interested before I do the fundraiser. And the director and I are trying to figure out like a rock bottom way to produce it. Like, how can we do this as cheap as possible, except like he has very high artistic standards. We wanted it to be lit well and look good and look artistic because people have such a social stigma against ventriloquism.
Yeah.
So I didn't want people to turn on and be like, this looks like low budget, I don't want it. You know, I wanted it to look really good so people are like, oh yeah, but be funny.
Yeah, I turned it on, I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is really like a movie, you know.
That's what we wanted, because of course you can film stuff cheaper, which is fine. I mean, like Tim and Eric are one of my favorites, and all of that looks very low budget. It works for what they are, but I feel like with what I'm trying to do with the art form, it needs to be a higher standard so people don't turn off, you know.
Incredible. That's just, I'm so glad that mindset comes into it, because I think a lot of times certain people, not any listeners of our program, but sometimes certain people that put stuff out there with Vent don't think about whether or not it's gonna hurt or help the art.
Yeah, I'm trying to elevate it again, consciously and subconsciously, because it's such a cool thing and the world's ready for all these old things. I mean, you've lived burlesque and vaudeville has been really big here for a while. Like, I do a regular gig at the Slipper Room, and it's like an old-time burlesque show with like trick ropers and magicians and sword swallowers and burlesque dancers. I mean, and people love it. So I feel like as technology gets more intense, that people will want something simpler again, like ventriloquism.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're definitely seeing a resurgence of it and an interest in these older art forms, especially in the city and the venues you were mentioning.
Right. I mean, it's really cool how it works, and a lot of those decisions in the pilot for the web series were very, like, I don't think I've ever, like, made so many conscious decisions about something, and it was because I knew I really wanted to do this. But there's stuff like the director and I were discussing, like, you know, ventriloquism on film, people might think we dub the voice in, and how do we make, because I had a puppeteer, because on Lamb Chop's Play Along, Lamb Chop's arms would move, but I'm doing Cecil like 75% of the time. But we were even exploring stuff like, when the puppeteer moves Cecil's arms, Cecil looks like too good. Like, are people really going to believe I'm doing it? So there's a lot of scenes where I'm holding his arm and moving it, because we wanted people to really understand, because I think that's goofy and funny too, but we really wanted people to understand that I am doing it, you know, that it's not just a puppeteer doing it, moving everything.
Yeah, as much as you want that separation,
right,
you also want them to know, hey, I'm creating this character for you.
Yeah, and that was interesting because we really tried to mess with people. There's a lot of hidden things. Like, there's times where he's really close to me, and it looks like I'm doing him, and then I get up.
Yes.
And it's really the puppeteer, all these hidden things like that, where we really try to mess with people.
And the one thing I noticed is you could be tied in on you and it looks like you're doing it, and then they'll go to a long shot.
Yeah.
and he's just moving over, and you're just sitting there with your arms folded on the desk.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
And we did the drinking bit, which was funny.
I love that.
That was, of course, I could never do the water thing, but I'm doing his voice the whole time. Like, we did it live, like, with the puppeteer. Tyler Bunch was so good. He can just, like, lip sync to stuff. He's like a Muppet guy.
Did you have to practice the cadence and the way that you would say it so that he could match up?
You know what's funny? Everything was so low budget and volunteer. Like, I was so grateful for the time. I mean, he was able to come the night before for like an hour of rehearsal, but he got it like immediately. I mean, that's why I try to work with pros or people that like want to be that good, because he got it like immediately. And the guy that did Pearl Friday did a good job too.
Yeah.
He did an amazing job. He built Pearl. And the stuff he came up with, there were some issues with the puppets, but that's how I'm like, this guy is really good, because he used the puppet's faults to make it look better. Like, she moved kind of stiff, but then it totally worked.
Yeah, it did, because she was like, what are you talking about?
I know, I love it. Yeah, and we had her switch from a real dove to a puppet, because that's like an old school thing. People that I think is so ridiculously funny.
A throwback to great conventions, and dare I say, because, again, me being kind of ignorant to some media sides of it, I don't think there's been a well-produced ventriloquism show where the ventriloquist is actually doing the voice, or a show wherein ventriloquism is utilized, where the ventriloquist was doing the voice without overdubs, since Soap.
Soap is so good. I love Jay Johnson.
Yeah, hi Jay.
I love you, Jay. He's so creative. He was someone I was inspired by. Remember when I was younger, he had like this monkey puppet, Darwin.
Yeah, Darwin.
He was just good. I mean, and Bob and everybody, and he was always very sweet to me. I love Jay Johnson. And he has dimples too, like me, I think.
Yeah.
I like your dimples.
He's the one who introduced us at the
You're right.
convention, and then like I didn't see you for the rest of Venhaven.
I know, it was crazy.
I was running all over the place.
No, I was too, because see, I wasn't staying at that hotel.
Oh, really?
Because I went last minute. I got the ticket in the hotel like a week before, so I was staying like 10 miles away, so I would come in and out, and I hadn't been to the convention in like 7 or 8 years. Yeah. So it was crazy.
Yeah.
There's some people I didn't see like at all, which was like same thing.
Yeah, so it was like for 3 minutes late at night on that first day when everybody just got in.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh hi, nice to I know. And then we were like dead to the world. So I felt so bad because I'd heard so much about you and knew your work, and then met for 3 minutes.
Oh, I know how it goes, and like that type of thing is exhausting too. I remember on like the third day, I was like, I gotta go lay down or I'm gonna die, and I fell asleep for like 5 hours and missed like half the night.
Yeah, sometimes when it's busy, you gotta kind of pick and choose what you go to.
Yeah.
But it's so hard because the convention is so good. I want to bring this around to the final question that I always love to ask my guests. What do you want to see from ventriloquism? Being such an innovator yourself, tipping it on its head like we've talked about, what do you think should come up next?
I think that someone should have a network show with it and make it accessible again. I think everybody's ready for that. I would love to see it in our generation, like really hit cool, like on something like Adult Swim or something. I mean, the older folks like love it because they grew up with it, which is great. They get it, but it's like I want the younger generation to hook into it, to really be entertained by something that can be adult but is really a kid at heart, because it's a puppet. And I think it is, because I did Dragon Con last year, which is a huge like comic book convention, and people love, and it was all like, I mean, I'm early 30s, so these are kids like early 20s and teenagers. They did this puppet show with puppeteers for like 1,000 people showed up, and like around the block, and people love puppets again, and I want to see it more mainstream again, like everywhere, and also shake off the shackles of certain stereotypes about it would be great. That ventriloquists can be good. Yeah. Did I also tell you I can't answer a question quickly?
No, I know that's good, because and continue to elaborate, because I just love it when you just ramble and go. It's what leads to more questions.
You can always edit.
Oh no, I like to keep these things at about a half hour or so.
Yeah.
So it's and so lead question for that is, How can we continue to decrease that stigma and get rid of those shackles?
Well, I mean, I think it's like you have to really try to be good and try to elevate the art form. Like, there's like always this big debacle in the comedy world that women aren't funny. Like, people say that, and Joan Rivers, who is a big influence, and I loved her, and I'm sad she passed, but she always used to say, just be funny. Women are funny. So other ventriloquists, just be good. Just try to be good. Like, try to really elevate the art. It's an art form that can be done well, and don't play into the stigmas of it. Like, if someone asks you to do something that is going to make ventriloquism look bad, don't do it. I don't do it. Like, if I think someone's going to put a negative spin on it, if it's a jokey spin, then fine. But, like, I try to control everything I do of it. Like, I won't involve myself with people that make it look bad.
Exactly.
And I think people have to realize that you don't have to take every opportunity. I've gotten further in the past year by saying no. You know, you get to a point where you're like, I don't need to do this or that because it won't make it look good. So I think that's good advice to follow. Treat it like an art form, because it is.
Awesome.
There it is in one quick sentence.
Well, that's great, and that wraps it up. From the Bean in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, New York, I'm Matt Bailey with Ventriloquism Weekly. Thank you so much, Carla.
Thank you, Matt. You're a great interviewer.
Well, no, you were a great guest.
Aww.
Carla, thank you for inviting me out to Brooklyn to do this. It was awesome. I wish you continued success with everything you do. It was awesome to get to talk to you. I'm so excited. I still can't believe it. It was really cool. Finally got to do this. Well, that's it for us this week. Next week, as is our custom, we will be off as I head home for the annual Kutztown Magic Convention in my home state of Pennsylvania, in, of course, Kutztown. To anyone from the area who may listen to my ramblings, Grandma, you do not count. You're already going. You know that. You can find out more info on the Kutztown Convention and Evening Gala show by visiting kutztownmagicconvention.org. And because I have been a member of the IBM Ring for many, many years, God, how many years now? I don't even know. It's close to my heart. I gotta swoop in here and just do some shameless promotion for the Northeast magicians who may listen to Ventriloquism Weekly. This year we have Sonny Fontana, Michael Finney, Michael Amar, really cool from Vegas, from the UK by way of Vegas, Piff the Magic Dragon. And this is the most awesome to me, being here in New York most of the time. Before he heads to Broadway in The Illusionists, Kevin James is bringing his full act to Kutztown. All right, that really is it for us this week. I shall see you in 2 weeks. A reminder, you can find all you need to know about Ventriloquism Weekly by visiting our website, ventriloquismweekly.com. Reach out by emailing ventriloquismweekly@gmail.com and find our group on Facebook by searching Ventriloquism Weekly -podcast for ventriloquists. Tweet us at Talk4Two. From New York, signing off for Ventriloquism Weekly, I'm Matt Bailey, reminding all you vents out there to keep talking for two.